I am very excited to share this life-saving technique, which I call super advanced Laryngopharynx closing technique with you. This technique is amazing. My amazing journey and exploration took me to discover unknown medical breakthroughs and miracles. The first great battle was to combat and stop the onslaught of acid regurgitation and acid reflux. I had my first success within 3 months after the operation. Today, I have many amazing techniques to combat that onslaught. Every technique that I developed is a greater achievement than the previous. They are all incredible and I use them all. They are all very effective. I have even more techniques in my arsenal to fight in victory. I can't wait to share those techniques with you. In the previous episode, I shared with you this life-saving technique, which I call my advanced Laryngopharynx closing technique, which again changed my life forever. When I told an cardiothoracic surgeon professor and some highly qualified doctors that I could flatten and close my feeding tube, they did not believe me. They were very skeptical and would not believe me. They know that the flattening of the feeding tube can only be done by the swallowing process, which are controlled autonomic by the autonomic nerve system by activating the process called peristalsis. They knew that my esophagus was surgically removed, and the only part of my feeding tube that was left was my laryngopharynx. To flatten the laryngopharynx is not voluntarily possible. At least that is what the medical records claim to be impossible. If you have not watched the video of the closing of my laryngopharynx, please watch episode 8. Why is this technique unique? It is unique for mainly 2 reasons. Reason 1, that is the flattening of my laryngopharynx using the larynx to assist with the flattening process. Not only was this impossible to achieve, so I was told, I could hold that position for a long time. I sleep holding that position. Why is this technique unique? With the swallowing process, the larynx moves up and forward. That is also visible from the outside. Why is that necessary? For many reasons. I want to categorize this into 2 main categories. Category 1, the larynx move up, and how does that happen? During the swallowing process, the outer longitudinal layers of muscles pulls the laryngopharynx up. The larynx is joined with various muscles to the laryngopharynx. When the laryngopharynx moves up, it also pulls up the larynx. This is amazing. Why is that important? Very important. Now, in that upward position, the bolus of food has a shorter distance to travel. Down the oropharynx into the laryngopharynx. This all form part of the normal swallowing process. The upward movement of the laryngopharynx and larynx does not only decrease the distance the food travel down the oropharynx, but also decrease the chamber of the oropharynx. The swallowing process is a sophisticated diaphragm pump action. The success of a pump depends on how effective you can decrease the chamber where the liquids is contained in. That in turn will increase the output pressure. Category 2. When the larynx is pulled up, the larynx is also pulled forward or outwards, assisted also by the muscles underneath the chin. During this process, the laryngopharynx is also pulled forward and open. Both are moving upwards and forward or outwards. This process also assists to open the supraconstrictor, which is the upper part of the laryngopharynx. The result of this position ensures good food entry into the laryngopharynx. When doing my technique, the laryngopharynx are not moving upwards and forward, but is moving upwards and backwards. The only way that you are able to do that is by voluntary muscle control. I don't want to spend more time explaining that, but rather in a later episode. Unique reason 2. The seal that was formed between my tongue, uvula and epiglottis is also uniquely. This stage of the technique can only be done when you have good voluntary muscle control of these organs. Let me explain why I can make a statement like that. The normal function of these organs are as follows. To me, the movement of my tongue is pretty normal, although I believe that I have the ability to greater control of my tongue movements than the average person. The movement of the uvula is normally a hinging movement up or down. You can also flatten or spread out the uvula to increase the area size. In my case, I have the ability to stretch my uvula out as far as possible and allow it to rest onto the back of my tongue. This is not a gentle rest, but rather a compressed action between both my tongue and my uvula, pressed together to form a proper seal. My epiglottis is stretched out upwards to ensure a proper seal with my tongue base and overlaps the uvula. Let me illustrate. This is the tongue. The uvula flaps down onto the tongue and the epiglottis flaps up, overlapping the uvula, forming a perfect seal. What is the unique reason for the combined sealing of these organs? Vitally and critically important. In my earlier techniques, I needed to depend on the swallowing process, which is available to us freely, which I also used as a stepping stone to reach out to discover more amazing techniques. The flattening of the laryngopharynx was my first objective, to stop acid entering my oropharynx, and secondly was to keep it flattened for a long period of time. Any movement of any of the internal organs made me to lose concentration, and my laryngopharynx would open up, and every organ returned to its rest position. The tongue is the most difficult organ to keep under control, still for a long period of time. I used my uvula and epiglottis to assist to contain my tongue. To form a three-part seal would be the answer to this dilemma. I knew by doing that I had the ability to maintain this technique for a long period of time while sleeping. This technique also prevented movement of my uvula and epiglottis. This technique further opened up to me a new range of opportunities for me to explore. This would take me to a greater height of discovery. This was the future breakthrough that I was hoping to make, that changed the direction and outcome of my destiny. In this episode, I am sharing my super advanced laryngopharynx closing technique. What does that mean? This technique was born out of my previous advanced laryngopharynx and closing technique. Why do I call this technique the super advanced technique? Because you will not be able to do this technique without being able to do the previous 3 techniques, which I have shared with you in the previous episodes. I have not even shared this super advanced laryngopharynx closing technique with any doctor. This is also brand new information. And again, you are the first to receive this highly sophisticated technique. I developed this technique 4 years ago. The Lord Jesus is in control of my life, and He is directing my future steps. I trust that He will open new doors for me. Only He will send the right team of doctors to me who will be hungry and eager to explore my extraordinary medical breakthroughs. This technique became a vital key element to the better of my quality of life. This technique gave me the ability to be in a higher level of control over the outcome of every acid reflux that I developed thus far. This technique gave me the ability to stop any acid reflux with tremendous speed and effectiveness, and allowed me to control the easing out of the pressure without any adverse effect. All the surviving techniques that I learned over many years was God's ultimate plan to provide me a good quality of life and a new voice. This is my super advanced Laryngopharynx closing technique I developed under my personal conditions after suffering severely from acid regurgitation and acid reflux. I developed my technique based on my personal experiences and knowledge. I have no medical background or any medical qualifications. This is a basic step-by-step description and is based on how I think, hear, feel, and experience when carrying out this technique. The super advanced Laryngopharynx closing technique is extremely effective to eliminate or even prevent acid regurgitation and acid reflux by closing the Laryngopharynx. I strongly recommend that you do not try this technique. This technique is very complicated, and I don't want you to hurt yourself and receive any bodily harm. This is a very intensive exercise and require intense concentration. I do not declare this lightly. I present a lot of thanksgiving to the Lord Jesus Christ and respect the ability He blessed me with. This technique is very successful when the laryngeal and the pharyngeal muscles are used to close or shut off the Laryngopharynx to stop any food or reflux up the esophagus. This is a very advanced technique and again a voluntary action. Does this mean that this entire process is voluntary? Absolutely yes. I had to study the functioning of my body intensely. Vitally important was to listen to all the sounds that were produced during the process of muscle tension when the Laryngopharynx shut. The following sounds are vitally important to listen to when developing these techniques. The first sound is the sounds created within the mouth. The sound of the lips, the sound of the teeth, the sound of the tongue, and the sound of the saliva inside the mouth. Secondly, sounds created by the respiratory system. the amount of air sounds, the airflow through the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, the larynx, and the lungs. The sounds within the chest created by the breathing system, including the laryngopharynx and the stomach/esophagus and intestines. These were all air sounds. Thirdly, muscle sounds of the laryngeal and the pharyngeal muscles, muscles under the chin and neck muscles, muscles of the esophagus and intestines, sounds produced by muscles of the abdomen. These sounds are enhanced by the saliva present in and around these organs. The minimum amount of saliva is required to assist in the process. Only the right amount of lubrication is required. Too much saliva will force you to advance further into the swallowing process. To regulate the amount of saliva which is generated within the mouth is very vital for the success to maintain the technique for a long period of time. These salivary glands inside the mouth are stimulated by movement. The ideal position is to keep the tongue and mouth still for long periods to prevent the salivary glands to produce excess saliva. By evaluating the hardness of the different sounds, I need to regulate the amount of various muscle tensions that is required to hold the technique intact without causing unnecessary discomfort or injury to my body. In other words, keep the laryngopharynx closed by using the muscles economically. Use the minimum muscle tension in order to obtain required results. This is a very friendly operational procedure. I do this technique as preventative and also when I have to respond very quickly. This technique consists of 5 stages. Stage 1 is the oral stage. Stage 2 is the pharyngeal stage. Stage 3 is the breathing stage. Stage 4, a second oral stage. Stage 5 is a breathing stage. Stage 1, the oral stage, is the normal closing of the mouth. Let the upper and lower teeth touch with the closing of the mouth. Push the front part of the tongue softly against the upper part of the mouth or hard palate. Hold this position. This is done with very little muscle tension. I mostly do the technique slowly, and the process is always carried out very effectively. I do this very gently with comfort, not overworking of my muscles at all. Take note that my muscles are highly trained and developed. I know precisely the amount of power necessary to perform every movement with excellence. Then lift the rear part of the tongue up and push against the entire distance of the hard palate. By moving the tongue up and backwards, not touching the uvula. This is a very comfortable position for the tongue to stay in for long periods of time. Now voluntarily close the uvula, and breathing is now stopped. Stage 2, the pharyngeal stage. Firstly, use the laryngeal muscles and raise the larynx up. While in the upward movement of the larynx, voluntarily close the epiglottis. Now also use the laryngeal and pharyngeal muscles and flatten the laryngopharynx by adding the hard body of the larynx, pushing and assisting in the flattening process. The larynx consists of a soft bone or cartilage and is the ideal organ to use in obtaining required objective results. Lower the base of the tongue even more to assist with downward pressure to seal the laryngopharynx. Very important. I will only use the right amount of muscle power to effectively perform this action. Now I hold this position. Stage 3 is the breathing stage. First, drop or lower the uvula. Take note, the uvula is resting on the tongue. Secondly, again take note that the larynx moves down halfway. It stays against a flattened laryngopharynx. Just allow enough space for the epiglottis to open slightly. Voluntarily open the epiglottis. At this stage, you can breathe normally through the nose. Now I add the additional 2 stages. Stage 4 is an oral stage. During this stage, relax the tongue and open the mouth. This adds a lot of comfort to the concentration. This is a more relaxing addition to the technique. Stage 5, a breathing stage. Breathe normally by using your nose or mouth. Breathing now becomes autonomic. Please note, in all the previous techniques, I couldn't open my mouth. As soon as that happened, the larynx would drop down and the laryngopharynx would open. This is an amazing technique and more economical to use less muscle power, less energy, and eventually less concentration. Take note that I can keep this position for as long as I want, or just for an emergency period. I thank the Lord for this amazing technique. These techniques also became later part of my autonomic nerve system. In my next video, I will share with you an even greater mystery, how I further enhanced the voluntary super advanced Laryngopharynx closing technique. This technique I call my rapid super advanced Laryngopharynx closing technique. I thank you for taking the time to watch this part of my testimony. I trust that you are a little more enlightened and that you will also follow the next part of my testimony that is coming soon. This is going to be even a much more superior technique, and I can't wait to share it with you. This technique will shock doctors and deglutition therapists. They will not believe. I want to leave you with this promise. The Bible tells us in Philippians 2 and verse 13, "For God is working in you, giving the desire and power to do what pleases Him." In another translation, it tells us, "For it is God who works in you both, to will and to do for this good pleasure and purpose." Let us surrender to God and allow Him to do what He does best. Therefore, may God bless you all. Till we meet again, and goodbye.